Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
I'll be transparent. I can't necessarily remember what we originally were going to talk about. We have a list. Jason keeps a really good list of our topics, but we made a course correction tonight, and we're going to talk about this in the context of a book that Jason just happened upon. On was it Small Business Saturday? Was it Saturday that you got it?
I actually went on Black Friday only
Okay.
because I had the morning to myself.
Okay. So there's a book. We'll get to it in a second, because I'll let Jason do it because he's the one that found it. That book talks about, in effect, world building and storytelling.
Yep.
As a part.
Yep.
Then Jason was looking up the Modiphius, the new books that are coming out from Modiphius, the Player's Guide and the Game Master's
We're going
Guide.
down the rabbit hole tonight.
Yep.
Yep.
And you'd think that these two are separate, exclusive discussions, but the interesting part is, Jason, as you read it, you found a theme between the Player's Handbook reviews from what you were seeing, from this other book. I'll let you do the introduction on it and everything like that, and our discussions about world building and game design or game building or material design when it comes to us looking at porting Star Trek to Genesys.
Yep.
So we made a course correction because as we record this, we've been out on Twitter about 2 weeks. We've only got 100 and some followers, but in that short period of time, we've met some really interesting people virtually.
Really
cool people and open people, and have learned a lot about games that honestly we had never heard of.
Yeah, I mean, we've been exposed to the mainstream, but there's so much indie and homebrew work out there.
Yeah,
and that's where we're going tonight.
Yeah. So okay, so I'm gonna pass. So there is a book that you found on Black Friday.
Yep.
And as you get into it, I just got the book today, so you're gonna hear me talk about this as a new person who just paged through it before the episode and did some
just
of the same reading.
Songs, as the Klingons would say, songs will be sung about this day that I had this book a week before you did.
Yes. And that you were potentially going to pre-order Player's Handbook for Modiphius before me. I have not done that yet. I'm going to get it, but I just haven't.
Oh, you're going to get both of them just for the sake of completion.
So as you go into this book, I'm just going to say this because I found it fascinating. When you showed me the cover, it's a role-playing book.
Yep, you're going to read the title?
Nope, I'm going to let you do it.
Okay.
It uses the term fractal.
That's what grabbed my attention too.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
I'm going to pass it to you and let you talk. But that's when I saw that, when you showed me the cover of it, I was immediately intrigued. Go.
So Brad is subtly and surreptitiously talking about this role-playing game entitled Microscope. And its full title with subtitle is Microscope, a fractal role-playing game of epic histories. And it's by Ben Robbins. And this is not a new book, listeners. This was published in 2011. So we're catching this a decade after it went out in print. So to give a little backstory, a little context, as Brad already set up, it was Black Friday. So yes, we tend to record well in advance. And so it was Black Friday, and it was now I've got to double check my timeline because I got it wrong last time. It was 5 years to the day that, as we talked about in episode 1, that I got back into role playing. Hadn't done anything with it other than had books on my shelves since early grad school, and it was 5 years ago, the Friday after Thanksgiving, that I thought, to heck with it. I took my wife's cousin and one of her brothers, and we nerded out. And the force has been strong with me ever since, especially thanks to Brad. So I went back to, well, I went to to the source, to source comics and games, or games and comics. I always get that backwards. They'll forgive me, I hope. But it's our friendly local gaming store, and it's phenomenal. And as I had said to you, Brad, they just have the best browsing wall, right? This must be, man, I don't know.
Let me just clarify, because
Yeah.
that was a term I really hadn't really heard until you started using it. Call me ignorant. When you say browsing wall,
Oh, that's what I call. I don't know. The way you and I used to browse.
yeah,
At the browsing, but to me it's a browsing wall because I'm not one to buy much. But and I, like with you, like when we used to go back in the day in Milwaukee, when we go to the bookstores together, we'd browse and browse and browse, and sometimes leave with a book. Hopefully,
sometimes, yeah,
sometimes if
sometimes,
it was
but
successful, but many
yeah,
times no. And so I went there just to drink it all in, and they just have just a ridiculous collection, and they got all the mainstream stuff, and then they even have a section dedicated to indie titles. So I was looking over there because I had said to you ahead of time, kind of curious to see what's out there, in part because of what we've been discovering on Twitter. So I'm skimming, well, I should say I'm scanning that section. Like you said, it's a very, very thin
80
rule book.
pages. 80
Yeah,
pages.
80 pages.
Mhm.
It looks like a chubby version of Fate Accelerated.
Yeah.
Right. And but on the binding it says Microscope. Okay, well, I'm a scientist. I had to pick that up. I thought, okay, it's going to be some kind of dorky biology type of riff. And then I look at the cover, and again, like you said, it's got Fractal, right? Microscope, a fractal role-playing game of epic histories. I love everything in that title.
Well, that's why when I saw that, I'm like, okay, not knowing what was inside it, I thought that the nerd gods had come down on a shining chariot and had left a book based, or an RPG in a book specifically for a scientist like you.
Right.
And so literally, when I heard that, I saw Microscope and Fractal. I'm like, might be interesting to play, might not.
Probably not.
But
yeah.
But this was written by Jason's doppelganger.
Right. Right. So because I sent you the picture of it from the car, like,
you
look,
did.
And then the cliffhanger was, I'm like, and we have to use this. And so, okay, so let's talk about that, because you opened this episode by saying, okay, so this ties in to a bunch of Star Trek stuff, both their upcoming player's guide and game master's guide, as well as our pending Genesys port of Star Trek. Okay, so here's why, listeners. Brad and I, as you know, we've been talking on and off about world building across multiple episodes. And, this notion of world building, this notion of homebrewing a game, I mean, this is one of the things that attracts both of us to role-playing games, and is kind of this hallowed tradition from the beginning, dating back to the time of Gygax, right? Even Gygax had said, look, when the rules don't work for you, you skip over the rules. I'm paraphrasing here. And we've talked about in previous episodes how ultimately what happens at the table takes precedence, and the GM with player consent can adjudicate on the fly, whatnot. What intrigues us about Microscope in terms of world building is this. Now, I'm going to read just a few sentences from here. So again, this is by Ben Robbins, 2011. We're not going to get into a review of this game other than to say a few basic things first. There are no dice. This is a completely narrative role-playing game. It is agnostic to content. You can apply this to fantasy, to sci-fi.
He says, not to interrupt. He says you can use this with the Silmarillion. You can use this with Dune. You can use this
anything. Yeah. So again, instantly Brad and I are attracted to this concept of, okay, well, what's going on with this? Well, the rules basically, if you go through this very slim volume, the rules essentially dictate how there's no GM and everyone at the table takes a turn round robin, and they have to elaborate the story. But that's not what interests us. What interests Brad and me are the following pieces. First of all, Robbins calls this fractal. It's a bit of a gimme.
If you go to page 6, I finally figured it out. You going there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. It's quote, it's fractal gaming. Okay, sure it is. But it is in the sense of the argument in this book, in this rule book, is you don't have to think linearly. You can hop around in any temporal order so long as it connects. In other words, you can't invalidate anything that came before or after or during, depending on how you want to look at that, right? And Robbins encourages the players, the readers, if you will, to think in eras. Now, this is where it gets interesting to Brad and me. He breaks this up into several sections, but let's just look at setup under here. And here's what really hooks me and hooks us. Okay, first off, think in eras. Let's apply this to something like Star Trek or Star Wars, or honestly, I mean, any of the games where there are discrete or semi-discrete eras or periods of time, where the parameters are based on, like, when does the series take place, right? The fact that The Mandalorian is 5 years, what is it, 35 ABY, stuff like that. That if we want to go Pathfinder, right, that maybe this is in this age of Galarian, but not later. But the point is, in the book, in the rule book, you can hop around in any way you want, and you can build story. And specifically, what Robbins recommends is, quote, to bookend history. And I love this, right? This is Brad. This is why I'm like, you need to get this, and we need to talk about this. Okay, so here's what Robbins says, and I'm going to quote directly, so I hope he'll forgive me. But this is just a few sentences. On page 12, describe how your history begins and ends. These are your starting and ending periods or eras, the bookends of your history. Number 1, agree on a short description for each area, or for each era, just a few sentences or a paragraph at most. Number 2, decide whether each description is light or dark. In other words, what's the tone? And so his recommendation is you list the eras of your game. Let's apply this to a homebrew. You identify the eras and the periods of time, and then you identify the bookends. Let's say you have 5 eras. In each of those 5 eras, you identify what's the beginning bookend, the start, what's the finishing bookend, the end. So what's the beginning, what's the ending? And you write just a phrase or a sentence, and you indicate, is this light or dark? For example, I was working on this earlier today, as Brad knows, on our Star Trek port. Though now that I say that out loud, I realize I forgot about the tones, although they're there. But I need to label them light, dark explicitly. So let's talk about what's happening in Star Trek Discovery right now. Just a couple episodes into season 4. Spoiler alert. Pause here if you haven't watched it.
Pause.
Okay, so Brad hasn't watched it, so I'll spoil everything. So
I might have.
Season 4 begins on a light note with the attempt to rebuild the Federation. That's a bookend. We don't know how this era is going to end, but let's just make it up. Burnham and Book have a child who's empathic but stupid. End. Dark note. I'm going out on a whim there.
Oh, wait a second. Okay, you're bookending.
That's not true. I'm just asking.
Okay.
Brad's giving me the look as a little tear trickles down his cheek.
No. I was trying to figure out. I'm like, boy, have I missed an episode? Because I don't remember that.
No,
So-
you did not miss an episode. But so the point is to then summarize, because we're going to walk away from Microscope, our fractal game, in a moment, and start to talk more about the next book of interest that Brad brought up. So the takeaway for us, what we really appreciate about Microscope, a fractal role-playing game of epic histories, is number one, it encourages us in a homebrew situation to not have to think about the backstory and world building linearly, but that we can move fluidly across all the eras of the game. That's really helpful. Number two, that in every era, we don't have to specify everything. We can begin by simply identifying the bookends. What's the beginning of that era? Big picture. What's the ending of that era? Big picture. Are they respectively light or dark? And then number three, from there, we can start to fill in the specifics as necessary. Okay, so with that, I'm going to kick it over to you, my friend, to transition over to how this is relevant to the Star Trek Adventures Player's Handbook.
Well, so you,
Player's Guide.
yeah. Oh, yeah, I am. Okay, so you were looking at a review of
yes,
the Player's Guide.
Yep.
And it talks about, you listed this on here, the foundational years, the Federation and the Klingon Empire, allies and adversaries, which is that era, that TNG and DS9. That's the era that's gotten the most attention.
Yep.
Since the 80s. 2380 to 2399 is that post-Dominion War era.
Yep.
Then you get into like the Temporal Cold War, which we don't know a lot about from the Enterprise.
But isn't it interesting that in that guide they even specify that?
Yeah, 27th century.
Yeah, they've done their homework.
And then, like you said, the bookend, the starting, we don't know the bookend of the 32nd century yet, because
but it's in the guide, at least some preview stuff or some introductory stuff, and they even mention lower decks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw that and put it together, and I was out today. We talked while I was in the car driving home,
right?
And this idea of Genesys and Star Trek, I think we've kind of in our own minds turned it on its head. And in all honesty,
tell them about it.
Yeah, in all honesty, I think what we're looking at now is a situation where we look at Star Trek in this way.
Mm-hmm.
We look at these eras, and then we start building, in effect, toolkits or a toolkit. If I can, and I'm using your term, I want to make sure I'm not plagiarizing.
No.
To account for personnel, to account for equipment, to account for starships and vehicles, to account for the geopolitical.
Through the Genesys system.
Yeah. And when I look at this, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just thinking about this from my past experience. I could see a mind mapping tool. I know I have some on my Mac, and I could just see us sitting there and mind mapping eras, and then going down from there. On the flip side, someone I know has already started putting this to paper in a more defined way than just a traditional mind map, which is, for lack of a better term, the brain dump. So now what we have to do is look at, and I would argue, we haven't really talked about this a lot outside of this, so you're going to hear us we're breaking the fourth wall a little bit.
Yep.
We have to pick an era and work through and make sure we have this process down. So we kind of know what the eras. In all honesty, what's listed there is pretty well defined in terms of eras for this game.
Right.
I don't know if we could, you could probably take a look at nothing in Star Trek Online is canon. But we know through Picard, we know the end of we know the destruction of Romulus and Remus.
Well, the trial never ends.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know what that means yet. Spoiler alert, Q shows up in Picard season 2. And so now what we have to do is look at the Genesys system and how characters are created.
Yep.
Look at, if you look at it from roles and professions. I think you can I mean, at a very high level, you have science, engineering, and command. That's high level. Then you have to start looking at, for the most part, starships and vehicles that are space vehicles. I'm going to use a very generic term. Doesn't have to be a Federation starship.
So the vehicles, I'll just to me, the vehicles is one of the hardest pieces, right? Vehicles and equipment. Like, we already have a character sheet drawn up for this, an adaptation of the Genesys system brought over to Star Trek that we'll eventually have to test. But the vehicles and the equipment, that's where it gets wonky.
Well, and I think what we'll have to do is I'm looking over at my shelf, which I've reorganized. Jason's seen it. Jason has seen it.
Yep.
I'm gonna have to look at the Terranoth source book. We can look at the Android source book. We can get some ideas. No comment.
And
and the Advanced Player's Guide.
I just looked through that and I wasn't convinced.
Oh, really?
I digress. Yeah, we can come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we can use that as guides as to how they define equipment. How do they define vehicles?
And I think Genesys has put out some additional, like, supplementary tools, often available online for free. Edge is great about that.
Yeah. So I think we can do that. And I think it becomes an exercise, in effect, a beta. I mean, I don't know what your thought is. I think we pick an era and we drill down from that era. We already have the top level. We just have to define, from your perspective, is it a light era, a dark era? It's going to be interesting how we define that.
And not the era does. I think that's going back to Microscope. The era, it's not that the era has to be light or dark, but that we can define the beginning and ends, the bookends of each era as light or dark. And then you've got a continuum in whichever direction across that era as a guide for play.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at during Next Generation, into Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and all that, you have both periods of light and periods of dark. You had periods of light during exploration. You had periods of dark with the Borg invasion.
Right.
It's like you said, it's a continuum and it can swing. But what's the ultimate
right
at the end? And I don't want to give anything away. I actually, when I was cleaning out, I was looking through my Dragonlance source book for 3.5, and for those of you that know Dragonlance, you'll know pre-cataclysm, post-cataclysm. That's kind of, think of it as like the dinosaur, like a dinosaur extinction type of event.
Right.
There's a bookend to two eras.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, as you're saying, Brad, what we're really saying to everybody is, as much as to ourselves, is we are pivoting, as you said, with our homebrew design, right? A design that eventually we'll put out there, right, on Drive-Thru RPG, of course. But we are pivoting because, especially with the material coming out for Star Trek Adventures, so much of it has been done. So instead of developing a full-fledged game, as you said, we're talking about a toolkit, a conversion kit, if you will, kind of like you've brought up in the past, and like if you watch, there are at least a couple or few actually videos where Matt Colville talks about how he likes 5e and D&D, but he really likes the 4E combat system or whatever, right? And so there are ways to port that, there are ways to convert that. And so what we're talking about is leveraging the materials that Edge Studios puts out in terms of Genesys as a foundation, then the materials that Modiphius puts out in terms of Star Trek Adventures, as a way to then curate all of Trek canon as a world in which to play. And rest assured, everybody, that as we move forward with this project, it's going to be very, very specific, right? Part because of the way we think and the way we want to play, and with the fact that we want others to play, it's going to be okay. Here's the core material that you have to have, and here's what we recommend you have. And hopefully, I will not have pre-ordered the player's guide before we're done recording this episode, but I got to admit, this is the itchiest my trigger finger has gotten in a long time. Brad's giving me the Mr. Bigglesworth look, so that's not good.
No, I am holding out on the hope that it's almost like a standoff. Who's going to order it first? Yeah, exactly. So I am purposefully not opening a browser right now. I'm purely, one, for computer resource purposes, but two, to avoid the potential. I am not going to order right now. I know that you don't pay until it ships, but mental.
Oh yeah. No, I think you must with Modifius because they send you the PDF.
Oh, that's right. Well, then I definitely want to wait, just because I was a little liberal over the weekend.
Yes, you were.
With some of the work I've done, some of the things that I acquired.
Thanks to Brad and his wife, his friendly local gaming store will remain in business another year.
Yeah. Now, jokes aside, I actually got my wife to go to the gaming store with me, which is much more important than any sort of money that was spent there. I only bought a set of fake dice.
I mean, she did text me, and I quote, "I can't do this," but I think it's amazing you got her to go.
I got her to go. Yes.
It is. So it's incredible.
Yeah, my wife went to a gaming store with me. She's already said she'll never do it again.
But she did. Her.
Yeah, but she did go. But yeah, I fully intend on getting them. I will. It's just at this moment I'm going to hold, just to let the pocketbook recover and make sure that we have all of our other holiday things taken care of.
Let the smoke rising from the wallet drift away and cool down before he opens it again.
They don't come out until Q1 of next year. So I very well may not order until January. That still gives me time.
Yeah, that's possible.
And I don't necessarily need to be the first one if it's
but don't you have fear of missing out?
Nope. Because I actually didn't order the Delta Quadrant or the Shackleton Expanse books until they were out.
I'm actually really intrigued by the Shackleton Expanse, I have to admit.
I don't have the book yet. I just have
I thought you did.
No, I have the PDF. So
okay.
I will give you an update later.
Yep. Subtle. Smooth.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm waiting on that one. That one I didn't order immediately. I ordered later. I shouldn't say until it came out. The PDF was out when I got it.
Yeah.
But the Klingon book I didn't get, and the Klingon source book I didn't get, and the Delta Quadrant until the print was already out.
Right.
And what's nice is with Modifius used to have to ship from Britain. Now they ship from the US.
You were just telling me that off air. So now that we've introduced Microscope, I talked about it a bit. We've talked about the yet to print Star Trek Adventures Player's Guide, and we fully vetted your attempt to absolve your guilt over past and pending purchases.
I am so glad that Angela, you went to a gaming store with me and you have no interest whatsoever in returning. No. Nor will you ever have interest in listening to this.
Nor will my wife. No. And that's totally acceptable and maybe even better.
And it's probably for the best. Yes.
Yeah. So coming up in the future, then you'll hear us talking more on and off about our Star Trek port. In fact, right now we have an episode planned dedicated to it. I'm just looking toward the end of January. Schedules can always change, but that's kind of our plan, because that puts us a couple months out from where we are this evening recording, and that gives us time to, especially now with our pivot, to lay down some foundations for where we're going to go, and maybe even start to ask for feedback and help.
Well, and I think let's not forget too, thanks to our connections on Twitter and so on,
Right.
we've made some real connections with folks,
Yep.
bright, smart, creative people that actually are willing to come on and talk with us.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in all seriousness, thank you to
Shelley.
to Shelley,
Yeah.
and to
Jeff.
yeah,
Yep.
and to soon to be named people that you may
Yep.
hear about next week.
Yep.
Because they have given us in effect credibility to come on the show.
Yep.
And it not being a joke.
In fact, Brad, maybe why don't we wander over to the GM corner on that note, and maybe we can spend the GM corner just chatting about where the podcast is going to go in the coming months.
Yeah. So I joked about this in prior episodes. I don't know why we didn't jump out on Twitter more. We focused more on Facebook and a little bit of it on Instagram. So I don't remember what the context was. You and I were talking, and I'm like, I think we were talking about where we were going to post the episode. And so I went out
it was
on Twitter,
your idea.
And so I just started following and posting with people. And I've said this out there. Our intent has never been to reach a certain number of followers or listeners.
No.
We're always interested if it's material you find interesting. If there are things we're doing that you think we can do better, the only thing that you probably won't get out of us is more profanity. We do enough of that outside of the recording. We won't do it on the recording. We want to maintain our
facade of civility.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the things that's come out of Twitter are the connections we've made. And in all honesty, the connections we made thanks to Shelley posting. It was Jeff.
Yay, Shelley Mazanoble.
Yeah, I couldn't find Jeff, and we're not going to talk about that other person quite yet because we want to surprise people. But Shelley gave us a really good review and was very flattering.
Yeah, and an introduction to the broader Twitterverse around RPGs.
Yeah, and so all of a sudden now we're connecting with folks. I mean, just unbelievably bright and creative people. And we've got potentially probably 5 or 6 very solid.
So speaking of bright and creative people, Brad and I have talked for a while how we really want to bring you interviews with bright and creative people. We have our bent is we have a kind of a lean toward writers, but not exclusively, right? Creatives, as Brad has said many times, creatives, writers, editors, producers, whatever. We keep expanding, but toward that point, we brought you a few really cool people, really creative, bright people. And next week you're going to get our third writer, but different, more. And we have then on the 5s, remember our 0s and 5s episodes, we want to have an interview. We've got 2 interviews scheduled, another 3 or 4 being scheduled right now. In fact, again, thanks to Brad, we are talking to so many people that we might for a while end up bringing you much more frequent interviews. No promises, but it's looking that way. Besides, we figured you'd rather hear from more than just us on a weekly basis. So stay tuned. Really cool stuff is coming.
Yeah, and I'll selfishly say, I think in all honesty, it's good for those people. It's always, these people don't need us for a voice.
No.
So it's very flattering that they'll come on.
Yeah.
But we've had great conversations with individuals that we're going to see joining us in the future. Interviews for us, even if we binge on them for a little bit, will only help our creativity.
Yep.
So selfishly, there is a benefit to us. Let's be honest.
That's why we do this, though, because we enjoy it so much.
And we enjoyed so much, and we have met again, and literally talked with fascinating people already, and I cannot wait.
Oh man,
to for you all to see what's coming down
Yep.
down the road.
Yep. And not just the super mainstream, right? We really want to talk to people who are both in the mainstream, in the big games, but as well as the indies, where they can use the traction and they're doing something really interesting. And so stay tuned. This next year, we're not rushing it, we're taking our time, but this next year is going to feature a lot more diverse, interesting interview-based content as we move forward.
And I'll say this, Jason, then I'll let you wrap up, but there's no danger in us going anywhere. Like I said, we would love lots of listeners, of course.
Mm-hmm.
We know full well that some people will find this interesting and some won't. Could we make it funnier? Sure. Could we use the clown horns and me make fun of Jason and Jason? Of course.
But we do that anyways. We don't need to record it.
We don't need to record it. I mean, I think that could be like a Patreon thing where you could have the rated R version of the podcast. But then most of this podcast would just be bleeps and bloops. But then I'll let you go.
We do have Patreon. People can always give us money.
Oh yeah, please. Please do.
There's always a rule book out there needing to be purchased.
Yeah, it'll fund my books, and cause me less of an issue at home.
Right.
But now you got me thinking about putting that out on Twitter. No, but that was actually funny and truthful in an odd way.
Yeah.
But
I hurt because I love.
We're going to work. See, this is what you get on Patreon. We are going to continue to do this regardless of what our listenership and our followership is. We want more, don't get me wrong, but we do this in all honesty because we talk about it anyway, and we'd be doing this stuff anyway. So why not put it out there? If someone catches on to us at episode 30 or episode 20, great.
46 is when we're going to hit our stride. Did I take it away from you? Sorry.
Yes, you did. Go ahead. You that was the topper. If you don't know what
46,
yeah. 46. You really got, what was it? You really got
wasn't it? You really
found
hit your stride. Or
you found your voice in episode 46.
God, that was funny.
If you don't know where that's from,
catch up.
Yeah.
Catch up, especially if you are our age, right? If you are, you're listening to us because you are a fellow or sororal or otherwise middle-aged geek who's into RPG and into all these other things. If you don't know where that's from, go find it.
If you're a Gen Xer, if you're a Gen Xer,
right,
you're gonna know.
Yep. This is core early Gen X stuff. Beautiful stuff. All right. With that, we're rambling, so we're going to call it. Thanks as always for staying with us. You know the deal.
Jason, do you smell every book when you pick it up?
Maybe.
Okay. Just thought I'd throw that out there, but go right ahead.
I won't even get started. Yes. Okay. Yes, I do.
Okay. I just thought I'd poke back a little.
Yep. I do, and I have specific feelings about the ink and glossy scent from the Fantasy Flight publications, but that's another topic. So with that,
and on that note,
try not to smell anything on the way home. Be well, stay well. As always, we will see you next week when we will specifically be interviewing someone really, really interesting. Stay tuned, everybody.